Hi, my name is Dr. Rachel Kins, and I'm a criminal justice professor, and I'm here to introduce Alexis Holt, who will be doing an honors project talking about policing in America and how it is a necessary source of crime control. I've been working with Alexis on this project for 2 semesters now, and I know she's so excited to share what she has found out and learned throughout this process. So I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Like Dr. Kuhn said, my name is Alexis Holt, and I will be presenting my topic over policing in America. So why did I start this project is, as a criminal justice student, I chose this project because police officers are a necessary part of the world that we live in, especially in rural communities. They don't only just protect and serve, but they also do crime control. And they make everyone feel safe when it comes to the end, because that's what their main job is. Why is it important? Police officers consistently are watched by society and are expected to follow certain society standards. For instance, police do have misconduct, and there are always bad people in the groups that are chosen, but most of them are good. However, most police officers do serve the public with a positive ways by showing up to crimes, investigating crimes, patrolling the streets, and helping people in the communities. That's what their main purpose is. They do other things, especially when they're in rural areas, but we'll get to that soon. What can we potentially learn from this? The potential of this study is to get a better understanding on how important police officers are in rural communities. There is a lot of unrest and pushback now between the society and law enforcement officers. The problem with it is that they are in the eyes all the time. They do good things, they aren't as noticed, but when they do the bad things, it is everywhere. So we know more about the bad than the good. But I'm going to talk about the good. It is important to discuss and evaluate if law enforcement officers are truly needed in the current capacity or if their jobs should just change. So based on my current study, which I did a survey with criminal justice students, the survey has consisted of 3 groups of scenarios, and let's get into them. Scenario 1 is the first set of scenarios help determine whether police officers are follow protocol or not. There are standards in their departments, training associated with their job, and continued educational learning opportunities to make sure that they are doing everything that they need to do correctly. There are certain protocols law enforcement have to follow, which at times exceeds and all of that. For example, they must use their service weapon if they are in danger, feel threatened, or situation has escalated potentially to a deadly scene. So the first scenario talks about, or says, Officer Nevada and Davis are responding to a non-emergency line. A citizen in town was called in by a neighbor with some questionable and potentially dangerous behaviors. The citizen seemingly was suffering from a mental breakdown and was in their yard yelling obnoxiously and rolling around on the ground for approximately an hour. Both Nevada and Davis approached the citizen to determine what is going on. The citizen disregards the officer's statement of their presence and reaches into the citizen's oversized coat. And acting in instant, Officer Nevada pulls out their gun in response to the citizen's actions. The citizen sees the gun and becomes more nervous. Officer Davis tries to calm down the citizen, which is ineffective. Eventually, Officer Davis tackles the citizen to the ground and the citizen retains injuries. Officer Nevada never fires the gun and the citizen does not have a weapon on their person. So the questions that the students had to answer were, did the police officer want to help the person who was suffering? Did the officer help the person who was suffering? Did the officers assess the situation properly? Did the victim do anything to warrant force? Do you believe training for this situation could help all officers effectively respond if they are faced in this type of call? The students had to go in and answer yes, no, or unsure. And if they were unsure, then they kind of put notes to let me know why they were unsure for sure. But most of them said yes and no. So the next scenario is kind of the same, but ends differently. Officer Nevada and Davis are responded to a call from a non-emergency line. A citizen in town was called in by a neighbor who, for some questionable and potentially dangerous behavior. The citizen seemingly was suffering from a mental breakdown and was in the yard yelling obnoxiously and rolling around on the ground for approximately an hour. Both Nevada and Davis approached the citizen and to determine what's going on. The citizen disregards the officer's statement of their presence and reaches into their oversized coat. Acting on instinct, Officer Nevada encourages Officer Davis to join him on the sitting on the lawn and waiting for the citizen ready to talk. The citizen sees the officer sitting on the ground on the lawn and sees them keeping their distance. He takes his hand out of his pocket holding a stuffed toy. They begin to have a conversation from a distance until the citizen joins the officers on the ground. Eventually, they are able to calm down the citizen and call in for services to help the citizen. The questions again that the students had to answer were, did the police want to help the person who was suffering? Did the officer want to help the person who was suffering? Yes. Did the officer help the person who was suffering? Did the police officer assess the situation properly? Did the victim do anything to warrant force? Do you believe training for this situation could help all officers effectively respond if faced with this type of crime? So that was the first two questions. The second set of questions dealt with policing involves more than just crime control and response, especially in rural communities. Police do more than just handle criminal activity. They may be called to complete welfare checks, search for lost animals, help other first responders, or other generalized tasks. The first scenario describes a welfare check, and the second scenario describes a noise complaint being filed. The first one, it says, Darla lives out of state. She and her mother are very close and talk every day on the phone at exactly 4 p.m. One day, Darla was waiting for her mother to call, and at exactly 4 p.m. She waits until 4:30, and there is still no call from her mother. This is very strange behavior from Darla. Has never missed a call from her mother, and her mother has never missed calling her daughter at 4 p.m. Darla becomes very concerned and tries calling her mother. Her call goes to voicemail. She tries and tries again. Her calls go to voicemail. Becoming very concerned, Darla calls the police department in the town where her mother lives. She requests that they conduct a wellness check on her mother, as her mother lives alone and there is no one Darla knows that could do a wellness checkup on her. The police respond and conduct a wellness check. It turns out Darla's mother had accidentally taken NyQuil instead of DayQuil and had sleeping through her phone call time. The questions that the students had to answer were, was calling the police warranted in this situation? Was the accurate protocol used in this situation? Should there be a limitation of the severity of the situation? Should police accept these kinds of calls? And should these types of calls be a police officer's priority? As stated before, the second one deals with noise complaint. A group of rowdy college kids move in next door to a family home. Every weekend, the college kids host parties for their fellow students, and the noise level stays elevated well into the night. The neighbors are struggling to get their children to sleep on the nights that these college kids are having their parties. They knock on the college kids' house to ask them politely to contain the noise and music levels so their children could get to sleep and stay asleep through the night. The college kids apologize and say that they will give it their good college try. Several nights later, the college kids are again having a party at the house. At the end of their patience, the neighbors decide to call the police and file a noise complaint. The police show up at the college kids' house and give them a warning. If they continue to play loud music and disturb the neighborhood's peace, they will receive a ticket and a fine. The police also shut down the party that the college kids were currently throwing, ending the loudness for the night. The questions that they had to answer were: was calling the police warranted in this situation? Was the accurate protocol used in this situation? Should there be a limitation on the severity of the situation? Should police accept these kinds of calls? And should these types of calls be a police officer's priority? That ends the second set of questions that they had to answer. The third set was about constitutional issues. So since policing is seen as a government body, they operate under constitutional limitations. This means that they must follow the Constitution and uphold the rights of afforded citizens through the Constitution. Looking at constitutional issues is important for policing because it shows the restraints of their job, and it also makes sure that they are doing the best that they can. Scenario 5 is based off Matt v. Ohio case, which is an actual case that occurred. Scenario 6 is based off obtaining a search warrant. Scenario 5. In Matt v. Ohio, Matt was suspected of being involved in a bomb incident, and the bomb suspect was inside her residence. In addition, the police had suspicion and reason to believe that Matt was running a number game, which means gambling, through her home, which was illegal. The police knocked on Matt's door and asked for her consent to search her home without a search warrant. Matt refused them entry without a search warrant. The police sat outside Matt's home for 3 hours, then reapproached her and asked for consent to search. Matt once again refused, as they had not gotten a search warrant. The police forced their way into Matt's home. They did not find the suspect involved in the bombing incident, nor did they find evidence of running a numbers game through her home. Instead, Matt was charged and found guilty of owning lewd and obscene material, romance novels the officers found underneath her bed in her home. The questions that the students had to answer on the survey: was proper protocol done in this situation? Could the police have reacted differently in this situation? Was there a violation of someone's constitutional rights? Could the evidence be used in court due to the way the protocol was handled? Is there the right reason to believe there was a need for a search warrant? So now the second set of this has to do with obtaining a search warrant. Bernice has not been seen by her family for 2 weeks. Although Bernice is a college student and has an avid social life, she makes time to come home at least once a week to see her family. After the second time Bernice misses seeing her family, they reported their concerns to the local police. Bernice has been not answering her phone, and the calls go straight to voicemail. The police show up to Bernice's apartment and learn from her roommate that Bernice went on a date with a guy 2 weeks prior, and the roommate has not seen her since. The police receive permission from the roommate to search the apartment, and they find Bernice's laptop sitting in the living room. They take the laptop and learn the identity of Bernice's date, Colby Olson. The police submit an affidavit to the judge asking for a warrant to search Colby's home. Their request was granted, and the police had a warrant to search Colby's home for release. Once again, the questions that the students had to answer. Was proper protocol done in this situation? Could the police have reacted differently in the situation? Was there a violation to someone's constitutional rights? Could the evidence be used in court due to the way the protocol was handled? Is there reason to believe that there was a need for a search warrant? So now that we've talked about all of the survey questions, we're going to go into the preparation process. In the preparation process, before the students could take the survey, they had to sign a consent form. Students needed to be at least 19 years or older, and participation was voluntary, and they could stop at any point. Even if they had the survey in their hands, they did not have to finish it at all. And they could just say, hey, I don't want to do this, let's throw it out. The classes that I chose to take the survey was correctional institution, police and society, community-based corrections, and violent crime and victimology. The reason that I chose these classes was because they were upper-level criminal justice courses, and they were related to policing in some sort of way. I wanted to select classes with more specific criminal justice knowledge and students who would be able to apply the concept better than someone who was just taken into a criminal justice. The thought process is the higher the level, they've been in it more, they know the process, they know the protocols, they have a better understanding of the law and what's going on, instead of somebody who just came in and took one class. The class sizes range between 20 and 50 students. So now I'm going to start talking about the scenarios and the results due to the survey. So a little summary of the first scenario is Officer Nevada and Davis are responding to a non-emergency call line. The citizen is suffering from a mental breakdown and is yelling in their yard. The citizen puts their hands in their pocket of the oversized coat. Nevada pulls a gun out, and the citizen becomes more nervous at the sight of the gun. Officer Davis tackles the citizen to the ground. The citizen got injured. The gun was never fired, and the citizen never was armed. So number one question, which is right here, that's the questions at the bottom, was, did the police officers want to help the person who was suffering? As you can see, 27 people, 27, oh my, what's happening? There, we got it. Fits. 27 people said yes to them wanting to help the person who was suffering. 0 people said no, and 9 people were unsure. But like I said, they gave me some notes on why they were so unsure. Question 2, did the police officer want to help the person who was suffering? 3 people said yes, which is drastic change from what they said about them helping them. 19 people said no, and 14 people were unsure. Question 3, as you can see in the center, is more equal. Did the police officers assess the situation properly? 16 people said yes, 10 people said no, and 10 people were unsure on how to reply to that answer. Question 4, did the victim do anything to warrant force? 16 people said yes, and a lot of them said yes is because he put his hands inside his pockets. 15 people said no was because they should have known that he was suffering from something. And 5 people were unsure. The last question for this scenario. Do you believe training for this situation could help all officers effectively respond if faced with this type of call? 33 students said yes. 0 said no, and 3 were unsure. Now, scenario 2. Officer Nevada and Davis were responding to a non-emergency call. The citizen was suffering from a mental health issue and was yelling in the yard. The citizen put his hands in his pocket, of the oversized code. The officers had a conversation from the citizen from afar. The citizen calms down and they finally can call services to help the citizen. The first question, did the officers want to help the person who was suffering? 35 people said yes, 0 said no, and 1 was unsure. Question number 2. Did the officer help the person who was suffering? 33 people said yes, and were very impacted by this. 0 said no, and 3 were unsure. Third question. Did the police officer assess the situation properly? 30 people said yes, 3 said no, and 3 were unsure. Question number 4. Did the victim do anything to warrant force? 9 people said yes. 9 people said yes, 24 people said no, and 3 were unsure. The last question of this whole group. Do you believe training for this situation could help all officers effectively respond if faced with this type of call? 33 people said yes, 0 people said no, and 3 people were unsure on how to respond. Scenario number 3 was Darla and her mother talk every day at exactly 4 p.m. Darla waits until 4:30 and begins to get worried about her mother. She calls her mother and it goes straight to voicemail. Darla calls the police department in her mother's town. She requests that they do a wellness check. The police officers do the wellness check and turns out that she just took NyQuil instead of taking Dayquil. The first question that they had to answer was, was calling the police warranted in this situation? 35 people said yes, 3 people said no, and 8 people were unsure. The second question that they had to answer was the accurate protocol used in this situation. 29 people said yes, 1 person said no, and 6 were unsure on how to reply. Question 3. Should there be a limitation on the severity of the situation? 8 people said yes, 11 people said no, and 17 people were unsure. But a lot of them did give a lot of good reasons on why the severity would have been different, because if they were older, then it was better, but if they were younger, then it wasn't a problem. Number 4. Should police accept these kinds of calls? 31 people said yes, 1 person said no, and 4 people were unsure. Last question for this scenario. Should these types of calls be a police officer's priority? 12 people said yes and were very strong and adamant about it. 6 people said no, and 18 were unsure. Scenario 4. A group of college kids move into a house next door to a family. Every weekend they have a party. The kids and the parents are having a hard time sleeping and staying asleep while the college kids are having a party. They knock on the college kids' door and ask if they could turn the music down. The college kids apologize and say that they will try to keep it down. Several nights later, the family calls a noise complaint about the college kids' party. The cops show up to the party and shut the party down and tell them that if they keep being loud and ignoring the peace, that they will have to get a ticket and a fine. They then shut the party down. The first question that the students had to answer was calling the police warranted in the situation? 33 people said yes, 0 people said no, and 3 people were unsure. The second question was the accurate protocol used in the situation. 34 people said yes, 0 people said no, and 2 people were unsure on how to respond. Question 3. Should there be a limitation on the severity of the situation? 10 people said yes, 11 people said no, and 15 people were unsure on how to reply to the situation. Question number 4. Should police accept these kinds of calls? 32 people said yes, 0 people said no, and 4 people were unsure. Question number 5, and the final question for this scenario. Should these types of calls be a police officer's priority? 9 people said yes, 15 people said no, and 12 were unsure. Scenario number 5 was Mac via Ohio. Mac was suspected of being in a bomb incident and was assessed and had the suspect in the house. And they thought that she was running a gambling casino in her house. The first time the police showed up to her house was with no search warrant. She refused to let them in, and the police sat outside her house for 3 hours and then tried again. She once again said no, and they let themselves in. They used the force to get into her house. They found nothing besides romance novels, and she was charged and found guilty for lewd and obscene material. The first question that the students had to answer was the proper protocol done in this situation? 1 person said yes, 34 people said no, and 1 was unsure. Question number 2. Could the police have reacted differently in the situation? 33 people said yes, 1 person said no, and 2 people were unsure. Question number 3. Was there a violation of someone's constitutional rights? 34 people said yes, 1 person said no, and 1 person was unsure. Question 4. Could the evidence be used in court due to the way the protocol was handled? 4 people said yes, 28 people said no, and 4 were unsure on how to answer. Question number 5, and the last one for this scenario. Is there reason to believe that there was a need for a search warrant? 19 people said yes, 4 people said no, and 13 people said unsure. The last scenario that they had to answer. Bernice was a college kid who had an avid social life, but always comes home at least once a week to see her family. Her family did not see her for 2 weeks, and the second week her mom decides to call the police department where Bernice lives. The police officers show up at their apartment and talks to Bernice's roommate. She told the police that she has not seen Bernice in 2 weeks, but she went on a date the last time that she saw her. They got permission to search the apartment from the roommate. They found Bernice's laptop in the living room. They find out that she went on a date with Colby Olson, and they show up at his house with a search warrant to find Bernice. The first question that they had to answer was the proper protocol done in this situation? 31 people said yes, 1 person said no, and 4 people were unsure. Question number 2, could the police have reacted differently in this situation? 7 people said yes, 17 people said no, and 12 people were unsure on how to respond. Question number 3, was there a violation of someone's constitutional rights? 2 people said yes, 26 people said no, and 8 people said unsure. Could the evidence be used in court due to the way the protocol was handled? 29 individuals said yes. 1 person said no, and 6 people said unsure. The last question that they had to answer the whole thing. Is there reason to believe that there was a need to search for a search warrant? 27 people said yes, 4 people said no, and 5 people were unsure how to answer the response. In conclusion, through the results, although a limited pool of students, policing is still important. For example, for the question, was there a violation of someone's constitutional rights? 34 students stated yes. In rural communities, police officers are more often respected than urban cops. Rural communities officers are viewed as knowledgeable, protective, authoritative, and helpful. We see this trend in the answers that were given in the survey. Thank you for your time and listening to my presentation.